Alright, today we're going to be looking at 1 Nephi chapter 2 verse 15. And my father dwelt in a tent. Meaningless, right? This verse has been the butt of many jokes, both inside and outside of the church. We're going to look at it and see how meaningless it really is. How meaningless is anything in the Book of Mormon? If you've watched any of my videos, you probably picked up on that I don't think that any word is meaningless. I think every word was painfully thought through. We know that this painstaking effort is real because they said so. In Jacob chapter 4 it says, "Now behold, it came to pass that I, Jacob, having ministered much unto my people in word, and I cannot write but little of the words because of the difficulty of engraving our words upon plates. And we know that things which we write upon plates must remain." 2 Nephi 25:23, "We labored diligently to write." There's a variety of different references about how difficult it was to engrave on these plates. Some people talking about this verse, you'll see them talk about Mormon abridging the plates, but let's remember these are the small plates. Mormon did not abridge the small plates. So these are direct words from Nephi and Jacob here. This is Nephi and Jacob that engraved these plates. It's not an abridgment yet. So a lot of people on YouTube will say that this is an abridged verse. This isn't an abridgment. This is a direct quote. Keep that in mind as we go through this. Alright, we're going to look at tent, the Hebrew translation. Okay, we have ohel, which means tent. That's just a very generic term for tent. This could very well be the word that Nephi used to describe Lehi's tent, is ohel. In the Old Testament, we also see a lot of references to ohel moed, which is tent of meeting. So moed is meeting. Ohel is the tent of meeting. A lot of times ohel was the base word, and then an adjective or adverb would be connected to it to describe what the tent was used for. The word I want to look at though is Mishkan. Mishkan is a dwelling tent or structure. Remember, the actual phrase of this verse is, "My father dwelt in a tent." So to me it makes a lot of sense that Mishkan is the word that Nephi was using here. He dwelt in a tent. So if we were to translate this back into Hebrew, rather than saying ohel, we would probably more likely say Mishkan, or the dwelling tent. Now it's interesting because Mishkan was the word most commonly used in the Old Testament for the word tabernacle. So the scribes who translated the Old Testament from Hebrew into English went from Mishkan to tabernacle. If we go backwards from dwelling tent back to Mishkan and then translate it again into tabernacle, think about how much more significant that verse becomes. We could almost translate that same verse into, instead of "my father dwelt in a tent," "my father spent time in our tabernacle." So if we're going to examine this theory that possibly Lehi's tent was used as a tabernacle, what happened at Lehi's tent? Let's see. So 1 Nephi 7:11, they offered sacrifices in the tent. "And it came to pass that we did come down unto the tent of our father, and after my brother and all the house of Ishmael had come down unto the tent of my father, they did give thanks unto the Lord their God, and they did offer sacrifice and burnt offerings unto him." Now what would they have offered those sacrifices on? The altar. And where are they located? They're at the tent of their father. So in the next slide we're going to look at this layout a little bit. So what else happened in the tent, or the Mishkan? What happened in the Mishkan is the vision of the tree of life happened in the Mishkan. So in all these things did my father see and hear and speak as he dwelt in a tent, or as he spent time in the Mishkan, in the valley of Lemuel, and also great many more things which cannot be written upon these plates. So revelation was received in the Mishkan. 1 Nephi 16:10, "Given the Liahona, so went forth to the tent door. To his great astonishment he beheld upon the ground a round ball of curious workmanship." So now we have ornamental spiritual emblems that are received inside of the tent, or just on the outside of the doors of the tent. Let's look at the layout. Okay, so if we're going to compare this to the tabernacle, we got to know what Moses' setup looked like. From the scriptures we can see he had the tent within the walls of a fenced area and the altar outside the doors of that tent or of that Mishkan. So what we know from Lehi is he had a tent, and we know that he had an altar. They built an altar in 1 Nephi chapter 2, verse 6 and 7 that we've already talked about. So they had the altar, they had the tent, and we know that they were pretty close in proximity to each other. And any Bedouin travelers would have made a fence like this just to keep their livestock from being stolen or running away at night. This would have been standard practice to have a fence around this area. They had the altar, they had the tent, and all of a sudden this looks very similar to the tabernacle that was set up by Moses and the children of Israel. Now, one last final point to talk about is the location of this camp. Remember, we're at Wadi Taib Alisam. This is the path that Moses took, the purple, and then we have the path that Lehi and his family took in red. This is exactly the spot that these people would have crossed, the two paths would have crossed. So if they were to set up camp at this spot where Moses set up camp and had the same setup that Moses had, they may have even used the same tent poles that Moses had left sitting at Wadi Taib Alisam. To me, that's pretty cool that they set up this camp, this tent, at the same spot that the children of Israel would have crossed and set up their camp thousands of years earlier. They use what I think is the same Hebrew word to describe the tabernacle as they do to describe the tent of Lehi. Now, what are the chances that Joseph would have known this? He would have had to know Hebrew explicitly. He would have had to take in the Hebrew Bible, the Torah, read Mishkan, know that that meant dwelling tent, and then instead of using the word tabernacle, would have used a more literal translation of dwelt in a tent. He would have had to know the path of Moses and a very good understanding of the path of Lehi and where they would have crossed, where they could have crossed, and then set this up without telling anyone, only leaving the context clues of for somebody who understands Hebrew and the geography of the area and the Old Testament in depth to make this connection. The young frontier farm boy in his 20s somehow got lucky enough to translate Mishkan correctly, understand the setup of the ancient tabernacle, and understand the geographic routes taken by both parties to make this connection.